Fireside Tales for Wolfgang. Episode 43. Greetings and salutations. I'm Hunter Ackerman, here to read some classic literature for you. We launch into Ask Hunter Anything. Ask Hunter Anything. Email address AskHunterAnything@gmail.com is great just specifically to submit questions. So I just kind of went down on a free-flowing diatribe after the show last week because I had, Mom wanted a little more specific examples of inductive versus deductive reasoning, and I didn't even discuss a third form of reasoning called abductive reasoning, and being that it was the spirit of Halloween. Halloween thus encroaching at the time, I wrote up a little diatribe that I titled Inductive, Deductive, and Abductive Reasoning by Witches. So it goes like this. God, I can't believe I didn't even proofread this. This might be terrible. We'll find out. Deductive reasoning starts out with a hypothesis and examines the possibilities to reach a specific logical conclusion. For example, we point out to Macbeth that Macduff is a man. Men are mortal, therefore Macduff is mortal. If something's true from a group of things in general, it's also true for all members of that group. But oh God, we can cast a hex of false belief if we poison him with one of the premises being untrue. For example, if we tell Macbeth that he cannot be killed by any man born of a woman, and he'll assume all men were born of women, we'll make him think that he cannot be killed by any man. First fault, false premise. Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert, Macduff was delivered via cesarean section, and thus was, the direct quote, from his mother's womb untimely ripped, unquote. Second fault, although this one's only inferred, this jumps out at me. Macbeth isn't at all that worried about being killed by a woman, but ironically, Lady Macbeth is his eventual downfall. Inductive reasoning makes bigger generalizations from smaller, specific observations. Going back to the witches, a thing I pulled from the cauldron was Eye of Newt. A second thing I pulled from the cauldron was also Eye of Newt. A third thing I pulled from the cauldron was Eye of Newt. Keep on going for many eyes of Newt. Therefore, all the toil and trouble in this cauldron is comprised of Eye of Newt. So, inductive reasoning can result in something that we can't quite prove, but that might be true. Another example. Men listen to strong women. Lady Macbeth is a strong woman. Macbeth will heed all advice from Lady Macbeth. Huh, okay. Yeah, I'm with this so far. Our third type of reasoning, abductive reasoning. Abductive reasoning starts with incomplete observations and goes to the likeliest explanation. We will tell Macbeth that he will be king, and Banquo's children will be kings. Macbeth will conclude that Banquo will kill him, or that Banquo's children will usurp him, or that Banquo will father Macbeth's children, but everything is bad anywhere Macbeth can think of. But of course, we witches know that that's not what happens. Huh. Yeah, I think I'll tweak that a little bit and save it. I'm kind of liking it. It's all productive reasoning if you come to good conclusions. Fireside Tailes for Wolfgang. Originally broadcast on GWC Productions YouTube channel, Caps Media Television Channel 6 in Ventura on KPPQ LP Ventura at 104.1 FM and on the KPPQ Podcast Network. Episodes can also be viewed on Pasadena Media, either on Spectrum Charter Channel 32 or on AT&T Uverse Channel 99. All right, so where did we leave off? Part 2 of Murders in the Rue Morgue. They were looking over the gory evidence of the inexplicably awful murder scene in which there were 2 bodies found ridiculously mutilated. One body was shoved upside down, up the fireplace rather, like up into the chimney. The other body was thrown through a window, and both were ridiculously, horrifically mutilated. There was a great deal of money in the room, left untouched and out in the open. What we can there were 2 voices, multiple witnesses heard, that seem presumably to be the voice of the killers. And one of the voices was all the witnesses had described as being a Frenchman. The other voice, none of the witnesses could identify a national origin. And there were, as I recall, witnesses from 5 different countries and all over Europe. And none of the witnesses from the various countries could identify the non-French voice as speaking their own native language. So there was like a German, an Italian, a Frenchman. There were several countries represented, and everybody thought that the other voice, the non-French voice, was a foreigner to them. Interesting. So with that, this is the conclusion of Murders in the Rue Morgue by Edgar Allan Poe. Keeping now steadily in mind the points to which I have drawn your attention, that peculiar voice, that unusual agility, that startling absence of motive in a murder so singularly atrocious as this, let us glance at the butchery itself. Here is a woman strangled to death by manual strength and thrust up a chimney, head downward. Ordinary assassins employ no such modes of murder as this. Least of all do they thus dispose of the murdered. In the manner of thrusting the corpse up the chimney, you will admit that there was something excessively irreconcilable with our common notions of human action, even when we suppose the actors most depraved of men. Think too, how great must have been that strength which could have thrust the body up such an aperture so forcibly that the united action of several persons was found barely sufficient to drag it down. Turn now to other indications of profound strength. On the hearth were thick tresses, very thick tresses of grey human hair. These had been torn out by the roots. You are aware of the great force necessary in tearing thus from the head even 20 or 30 hairs together. You saw the locks in question as well as myself. Their roots, a hideous sight, were clotted with fragments of the flesh of the scalp. Sure token of the prodigious power which had been exerted in uprooting perhaps hundreds of hairs at the time. The throat of the old lady was not merely cut, but the head absolutely severed from the body. The instrument was a mere razor. I wish you also to look at the brutal ferocity of these deeds. Of the bruises upon the body of Madame L'Espagne, I do not speak. The two of us have pronounced that they were inflicted by some obtuse instrument. The obtuse instrument was clearly the stone pavement in the yard upon which the victim had fallen from the window which looked in upon the bed. This idea, however simple it may now seem, escaped the police for the same reason that the breadth of the shutters escaped them, because, by the appearance of the nails in the windows, their perceptions had been sealed against the possibility of the windows having ever been opened at all. If, now, in addition to all these things, you have properly reflected upon the odd disorder of the chamber, we have gone so far as to combine the ideas of an astounding agility, a superhuman strength, a brutal ferocity, a butchery without motive, a grotesquerie in horror absolutely alien from humanity, and a voice foreign in tone to the ears of men of many nations, and devoid of all and any distinct words. What result, then, has ensued? What impression have I made upon your fancy? I felt a creeping of the flesh as Dupin asked me this question. I said, "A madman has done this deed. Some raving maniac escaped from a neighboring hospital, I would expect." "In some respects," he replied, "your idea is relevant. But the voices of madmen, even in their wildest paroxysms, are never solely found to be totally indistinguishable. Madmen are of some nation, and their language is always the coherence of some words. Besides, the hair of a madman is not such as I now hold in my hands." I disentangled this little tuft from the rigidly clutched fingers of Madame L'Espagne. "Tell me, what you can make of this hair?" "Dupin," I said, just completely unnerved, this hair is most unusual. This is no human hair." "I have not asserted that it is," said he. "But before we decide this point, I wish you to glance at the little sketch I have here traced upon this paper. It is a facsimile drawing of what has been described in one portion of the testimony as dark bruises and deep indentations of fingernails upon the throat of Madame L'Espagne, and in another, by Messieurs Dumont and Etienne, as, quote, a series of livid spots, evidently the impression of fingers. You will perceive," continued my friend, spreading out the paper upon the table before him, that this drawing gives the idea of a firm and fixed hold. There is no slipping apparent. Each finger as retains, possibly until the death of the victim, the fearful grasp by which it originally embedded itself. Attempt now to place all your fingers at the same time in their respective impressions as you see them. I made the attempt in vain. Well, we are possibly not giving this matter a fair trial, he said. The paper is spread out upon a flat surface, but the human throat, that is cylindrical. Here is a thick piece of wood, the circumference of which is about that of the throat. Wrap the drawing around it and try the experiment again. I did so, but the difficulty was even more obvious than before. This, I said, is the mark of no human hand. Read now, replied Dupont. This passage from Cuvier. It was a detailed anatomical and descriptive account of the large orangutan of the East Indian Islands. The gigantic stature, the prodigious strength and activity, the wild ferocity, and the imitative propensities of these mammalia are sufficiently well known to all. I understood the full horrors of the murder at once. The description of the digits, said I, as I made an end of the reading, is in exact accordance with this drawing. I see that no animal but orangutan could have impressed the indentations as you have traced them. This tuft of tawny hair, too, is identical in character with that of the beast, but I cannot possibly comprehend the particulars of this frightful mystery. Besides, there were two voices heard in contention, and one of them was unquestionably the voice of a Frenchman. True. And you will remember an expression attributed most unanimously by the evidence to this voice, the expression, Mon Dieu! This, under the circumstances, has been justly characterized by one of the witnesses, Montagny, the confectioner, as an expression of remonstrance or expostulation. Upon these two words, therefore, I have mainly built my hopes of a full solution of the riddle. A Frenchman was cognizant of the murder. It is possible, indeed, it is far more than probable that he was innocent of all participation in the bloody transactions which took place. The orangutan may have escaped from him. He may have traced it to the chamber, but under agitating circumstances which ensued, he could never have recaptured it. It is still at large. I will not pursue these guesses, for I have no right to call them more, since the shades of reflection upon which they are based are scarcely of sufficient depth to be appreciable by my own intellect, and since I could not pretend to make them intelligible to the understanding of another, we will call them guesses, then, and speak of them as such. If the Frenchman in question is indeed, as I suppose, innocent of this atrocity, this advertisement which I left last night upon our return home at the office of Le Monde, which is a paper, by the way, devoted to the shipping interest and much sought after by sailors. This advertisement which I left last night upon our return home at the office of Le Monde will bring him to our residence. He handed me a paper, and I read thus. Caught in the Bois de Boulogne, early in the morning, a very large tawny orangutan of the Borneo species. The owner, who is ascertained to be a sailor, belonging to a Maltese vessel, may have the animal again upon identifying it satisfactorily and paying a few charges arising from its capture and keeping. Call at number such and such, rue such and such. How is it possible, I asked, that you should know the man to be a sailor and belonging to a Maltese vessel? I do not know it, said Dupont. I am not sure of it. Here, however, is a small piece of ribbon, which, from its form and from its greasy appearance, has evidently been used in tying the hair in one of those long queues. Yeah, you know, a long ponytail, of which sailors are so fond. Moreover, this knot is one which few besides sailors can tie, and is peculiar to the Maltese. I picked up the ribbon at the foot of the lightning rod. It could not have belonged to either of the deceased. Now, if, after all, I am wrong in my induction from this ribbon, note his correct and proper use of induction. If I am wrong in my induction from this ribbon that the Frenchman was a sailor belonging to a Maltese vessel, still, I can have done no harm in saying what I did in the advertisement. If I am in error, he will merely suppose that I have been misled by some circumstance into which he will not take the trouble to inquire. But, if I am right, a great point is gained. Cognizant, although innocent, of the murder, the Frenchman will naturally hesitate about replying to the advertisement about demanding the orangutan. He will reason thus: I am innocent, I am poor, my orangutan is of great value. To one in my circumstances, a fortune of itself. Why should I lose it? At this moment, we heard a step upon the stairs. Dupont then counseled, "Be ready with your pistols, but neither use them, nor show them until at a signal from myself." The front door of the house had been left open, and the visitor had entered and advanced several steps upon the staircase. Now, however, he seemed to hesitate. Presently, we heard him descending. Dupont was moving quickly to the door when we again heard him coming up. He did not turn back a second time, but stepped up with decision and rapped at the door of our chamber. Well, where have we heard that phrase before? Rapping at our chamber door. "Come in," said Dupont, in a cheerful and hearty tone. A man entered. He was a sailor, evidently a tall, stout, and muscular-looking person with a certain daredevil expression of countenance. His face, greatly sunburned, was more than half hidden by whisker and mustachio. He had with him a huge oaken cudgel, but appeared to be otherwise unarmed. He bowed awkwardly and bade us good evening in French accents, which were sufficiently indicative of a Parisian origin. "Sit down, my friends," said Dupont. "I suppose you have called about the orangutan. Upon my word, I almost envy you the possession of him. A remarkably fine and no doubt a very valuable animal. How old do you suppose him to be?" The sailor drew a long breath with the air of a man relieved of some intolerable burden, and then replied in an assured tone, "I have no way of telling, but he can't be more than 4 or 5 years old. Have you got him here?" "Oh, no. Well, we had no conveniences for keeping him here. He is at a livery stable in the Rue Dubourg, just by. You can get him in the morning. Of course, you are prepared to identify the property." "To be sure I am, sir." "I shall be sorry to depart with him," said Dupin. "I don't mean that you should be at all this trouble for nothing, sir," said the man. "I could not expect that. I am very willing to pay a reward for the finding of the animal. That is to say, anything in reason." "Well," replied my friend, "that is all very fair, to be sure. Let me think. What should I have? Oh, I will tell you. My reward shall be this. You shall give me all the information in your power about these murders in the Rue Morgue." Dupin said the last words in a very low tone and very quietly. Just as quietly, too, he walked toward the door, locked it, and put the key in his pocket. He then drew a pistol from his bosom and placed it, without the least flurry, upon the table. The sailor's face flushed up as if he were struggling with suffocation. He started to his feet and grasped his cudgel, but the next moment he fell back into his seat, trembling violently, and with the countenance of death itself. He spoke not a word, and I pitied him from the bottom of my heart. "My friends," said Dupin, in a kind tone, "you are alarming yourself unnecessarily. You are, indeed. We mean you no harm whatever. I pledge you the honor of a gentleman and of a Frenchman that we intend you no injury. I perfectly well know that you are innocent of the atrocities in the Rue Morgue. It will not do, however, to deny that you are in some measure implicated in them. From what I have already said, you must know that I have had means of information about this matter, means of which you could never have dreamed. Now, this thing stands thus. You have done nothing which you could have avoided, nothing, certainly, which renders you culpable. You were not even guilty of robbery when you might have robbed with impunity. You have nothing to conceal. You have no reason for concealment. On the other hand, you are bound by every principle of honor to confess all you know. An innocent man is now imprisoned, charged with that crime of which you can point out the perpetrator." The sailor had recovered his presence of mind in a great measure while Dupin uttered these words, but his original boldness of bearing was all gone. "So help me," said he after a brief pause. "I will tell you all I know about this affair, but I do not expect you to believe one half. I would be a fool indeed if I did. Still, I am innocent, and I will make a clean breast of it if I die for it." What he stated was, in substance, this. He had lately made a voyage to the Indian archipelago. A party of which he had formed landed at Borneo and passed into the interior on an excursion of pleasure. Himself and a companion had captured the orangutan. This companion dying, the animal fell into his own exclusive possession. After great trouble, occasioned by the intractable ferocity of his captive during the home voyage, he at length succeeded in lodging it safely at his own residence in Paris, where, not to attract toward himself the unpleasant curiosity of his neighbors, he kept it carefully secluded until such a time as it should recover from a wound in the foot received from a splinter on board ship. His ultimate design was to sell it. Returning home from sailor's frolic the night, or rather the morning of the murder, he found the beast occupying his own bedroom, into which it had broken from a closet adjoining, where it had been, as was thought, securely confined. Razor in hand and fully lathered, it was sitting before a looking-glass, attempting the operation of shaving, in which it had, no doubt, previously watched its master through the keyhole of the closet. Terrified at the sight of so dangerous a weapon in the possession of an animal so ferocious and so well able to use it, the man for some moments was at a loss what to do. He had been accustomed, however, to quiet the creature, even in its fiercest moods, by the use of a whip, and to this he now resorted. Upon the sight of it, the orangutan sprung at once through the door of the chamber, down the stairs, and thence through a window, unfortunately open, into the street. The Frenchman followed in despair. The ape, razor still in hand, occasionally stopping to look back and gesticulate at its pursuer until the latter had nearly come up with it, it then again made off. In this manner the chase continued for a long time. The streets were profoundly quiet, as it was nearly 3 o'clock in the morning. In passing down an alley in the rear of the Rue Morgue, the fugitive's attention was arrested by a light gleaming from the open window of Madame L'Espagne's chamber in the 4th story of her house. Rushing to the building, it perceived the lightning rod, clambered up with inconceivable agility, grasped the shutter, which was thrown fully back against the wall, and, by its means, swung itself directly upon the headboard of the bed. The whole feat did not occupy a minute. The shutter was kicked open again by the orangutan as it entered the room. The sailor, in the meantime, was both rejoiced and perplexed. He had strong hopes of now recapturing the brute, as it could scarcely escape from the trap into which it had ventured, except by the rod, where it might be intercepted as it came down. On the other hand, there was much cause for anxiety as to what it might do in the house. This latter reflection urged the man still to follow the fugitive. A lightning rod is ascended without difficulty, especially by a sailor, but when he had arrived as high as the window, which lay far to his left, his movement was stopped. The most that he could accomplish was to reach over so as to obtain a glimpse of the interior of the room. At this glimpse, he nearly fell from his hold through excess of horror. Now it was that those hideous shrieks arose upon the night. Madame L'Espagne and her daughter, dressed in their night clothes, had apparently been occupied in arranging some papers in the iron chest already mentioned, which had been wheeled into the middle of the room. It was open, and its contents lay beside it on the floor. The victims must have been sitting with their backs toward the window, and from the time elapsing between the ingress of the beast and the screams, it seems probable that it was not immediately perceived. The flapping to and fro of the shutter would naturally have been attributed to the wind. As the sailor looked in, the gigantic animal had seized Madame L'Espagne by the hair, which was loose as she had been combing it, and was flourishing the razor about her face in imitation of the motions of a barber. The daughter lay prostrate and motionless. She had swooned, fainted. The screams and struggles of the old lady, during which the hair was torn from her head, had the effect of changing the probably peaceful purposes of the orangutan into those of wrath. With one determined sweep of its muscular arm, it nearly severed her head from her body. The sight of blood inflamed its anger into frenzy. Gnashing its teeth and flashing fire from its eyes, it flew upon the body of the girl and embedded its fearful digits in her throat, retaining its grasp until she expired. Its wandering and wild glances fell at this moment upon the head of the bed, over which the face of its master, rigid with horror, was just discernible. The fury of the beast, who no doubt bore still in mind the dreaded whip, was instantly converted into fear. Conscious of having deserved punishment, it seemed desirous of concealing its bloody deeds and skipped about the chamber in an agony of nervous agitation, throwing down and breaking the furniture as it moved and dragging the bed from the bedstead. In conclusion, it seized first the corpse of the daughter and thrust it up the chimney as it was found. Then that of the old lady, which it immediately hurled through the window headlong. As the ape approached the casement with its mutilated burden, the sailor shrank aghast to the rod, and rather gliding than clambering down it, hurried at once home, dreading the consequence of the butchery, and gladly abandoning in his terror all concern about the fate of the orangutan. The words heard by the party upon the staircase were the Frenchman's exclamations of horror and affright, commingled with the fiendish jabberings of the brute. I have scarcely anything to add. The orangutan must have escaped from the chamber by the rod just before the breaking of the door. It must have closed the window as it passed through it. It was subsequently caught by the current owner himself, who obtained it for a very large sum at the botanical garden. Le Bon was instantly released upon our narration of the circumstances, with some comments from Dupont at the bureau of the prefect of police. This officer, however well disposed to my friend, could not altogether conceal his chagrin at the turn which affairs had taken, and was fain to indulge in a sarcasm or two about the propriety of every person minding his own business. Let him talk, said Dupont, who had not thought it necessary to reply. Let him discourse. It will ease his conscience. I am satisfied with having defeated him in his own castle. Nevertheless, that he failed in the solution to this mystery is by no means that matter for wonder which he supposes it. For, in truth, our friend the prefect is somewhat too cunning to be profound, but he is a good creature after all. I like him especially for one master stroke by which he has attained his reputation for ingenuity. Fin. Yeah. Well, the butler did it? No. The Indian orangutan did it. Who would have guessed? So, my mom had the observation that should be thrown in that we now know orangutans in general are quite gentle. Adult males can be aggressive, but for the most part, they keep to themselves. Orangutans are generally non-aggressive toward humans and each other. Ironically, Many individuals reintroduced into the wild after having been in managed care are aggressive toward humans. Yeah. Imagine that. I mean, this is literally slavery by any definition as we would apply it to humans. We have a couple of European sailors who go inland on this Indian island, find an orangutan living happily in the wild, presumably happy, minding its own business, capture it somehow, subdue it, force it onto a ship, sail it across the ocean to a foreign continent, take it off the ship, somehow one of the guys dies in the process. I mean, you kind of like hope the orangutan killed the other guy. That part wasn't specified. The orangutan is then forced into a small Parisian apartment somehow, then kept locked in a closet. I mean, yeah. Imagine it was a little volatile when it finally escaped. Oh, and let's not leave out the detail that the French sailor, when the thing misbehaved, actually used a whip to keep it in line. I mean, yeah, do that to any sentient primate and see if you don't turn it into like a razor-wielding murderer. I mean, wow. There was a bad guy in this. The bad guy just didn't happen to commit murder. I mean, whoa. Yeah, but from the Victorian perspective, he's the proper owner and completely indemnable to any, legal wrongdoings. Right. But such would be the Victorian notion of ownership of the orangutan, right? Just to suggest that you can own a sentient being. I mean, on a personal level, I obviously have no problem with domesticated companions of other species living alongside us peacefully, lovingly, but I always just kind of sort of internally rankled when someone would ask if I was Wolfgang's owner. Like, I mean, I understand the question that you're asking, and not to be intentionally obtuse, particularly to like a vet tech or something that's, making like $15 an hour and just trying to go through paperwork, really does not want to get into some philosophical discourse about one being owning another sentient being. It's just really just like, can I put you down here on the form? That's all, the person is asking. But yeah, it's I don't know. I find the term to be odious at best. Ask Hunter anything. Ask Hunter anything. Email address AskHunterAnything@gmail.com. Is great just specifically to submit questions. So, let's see. This is the zombie apocalypse question. And Terry, I don't recall hearing this question before, but it feels very Randall Monroe. It feels very XKCD. I'm curious if this was inspired or drawn from an XKCD, which is totally fair, by the way, for future reference. Terry's question: if you were being chased by zombies, how might understanding tangent vectors save your life? I'll repeat it one more time. If you were being chased by zombies, how might understanding tangent vectors save your life? Funny, because when I was in grade school, I actually thought about this quite a lot. I did not have the vocabulary to describe tangent vectors at that point. But I was thinking about it in the playground, and this is the direct application to the being chased by zombies question. This really gets at the heart of, where am I running? Where are things around me that are presumably chasing me running? So, I'm going to explain some math concepts with no numbers. Yeah, I think I can do this. Probably would have... Okay, we're going to start with an arrow. There's this whole thing in math called vectors. Vectors are extremely useful in physics. And a vector is basically you're describing something that can be drawn as an arrow that has both direction and the length of the arrow. Those are both relevant. So, a vector that looks like this on paper is different than a vector that looks like this on paper. And tangent vectors, that's a great question. Tangent vectors are vectors that at some point come together. That's what we mean by tangent, things in geometry that touch. So understanding tangent vectors is understanding how you, the running, trying to escaper, is going in your path versus how the zombie chasing you that might be running up either from like behind you and just going faster than you, or is coming up onto the side and is going to converge upon your path. That's what it really comes down to. Convergent paths. That's what we mean by tangent vectors to things that are, going to overlap at some point. So Christina has asked me in the past a question that's suddenly relevant. She wanted to know when you're multiplying things. She was like looking at my, I don't remember if I was explaining something and like writing out some things, or if she was just like looking at my notes from a math class. I don't remember the context exactly. She was saying, when you multiply, how come you don't use the little X symbol like we do in school? Like, if I typically write, for example, 4 times, I said I wasn't going to use numbers. If I am going to write A times B, I will usually put parentheses around them, for example, or I might write A dot B, and that's how I'm going to write multiplication, as opposed to the way that they teach you in elementary school of times means a little x. And the reason that we don't use that is because it means something very specific in vectors. So I'm going to describe this as vector A, and I'm going to describe this as vector B. A particular kind of multiplication in this form of math is called a cross product. A cross B results in this arrow. You see how that arrow is a combination of this arrow and this arrow? Okay. By contrast, if I were to take this arrow and multiply it with a dot product, all we get now is a longer arrow. we're multiplying it by a large number, for example. Or if we're multiplying it by a number that's less than 0, maybe we get a shorter arrow. So you're like multiplying it by 0.5. That's like dividing it in half, right? So now we get a shorter answer. So a dot product in that case, the other form of multiplication that uses just a little dot, just changes the length of the arrow. This also can be used to understand something about velocity and why velocity is different than speed. Because velocity is a vector, which you now understand. It consists of both a length, and that is the speed, that is how fast, that is the magnitude of the velocity, and the direction of the arrow. So it's not enough to describe a velocity as 35 miles an hour. A velocity is 35 miles an hour north, for example. A velocity has a speed and a direction. So you can feel this in physics, like you can feel this in a car. If you turn a corner in a car without changing the speed, so you're going, let's say, 10 miles an hour, and you go around a curve, you're going to feel your body, if you say go 10 miles an hour and you turn left, you're going to feel in the car your body leaning to your right because there is an acceleration in that left direction. Specifically, it's an acceleration toward the center of the circle, and the curve that you're going around describes a little piece of a circle. So you can accelerate without actually changing speed. You accelerate by changing direction. Of course, you also accelerate by changing speed, because any directions, any of these changes that you are making to your velocity vector, you're changing the length of the arrow or you're changing the direction of the arrow. That is all acceleration. And that's kind of a big deal in basic physics. Tangent vectors are vectors that touch each other. So if one vector, in the case of, this is a vector that represents you running, this is a vector that represents a zombie chasing you. Understanding how to keep those vectors from becoming tangent is you understanding how to keep a zombie from catching you. Exactly the same thing applies to, cats and mice. Cats and mice don't presumably understand a thing about vectors. But if a cat is chasing a mouse and the cat sees the mouse take a sudden turn, like this is the mouse, and the mouse takes a sudden turn, the cat can make the cat's vector tangent to the mouse and make their paths intersect, because now the cat, which was presumably chasing the mouse this way, all can just like cut the corner and catch the mouse by cutting him off. Is that gravity? Gravity can be described this way. Yes. Gravity is a basic force if you're looking at this through what we call a Newtonian perspective. There are, from classical physics like that, there are only 4 types of forces in the universe. There's the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, and then 2 that you're very familiar with: electricity and magnetism, and gravitation. And yes, gravity at the Earth's surface can be described with a vector. It's got a downward direction, so the arrow points downward. And if you were describing this with an arrow, the length of the arrow is how much the Earth's gravitational attraction affects your body. So With that, I think I'm going to wrap it up for the evening. Questions for next week or any subsequent show, drop me a private message or use the new email address down here in the bottom left. AskHunterAnything at gmail.com. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Fireside Tales for Wolfgang. You can view more of my work at Hunter's Acoustic Cabin. Directed by Hunter Ackerman. Produced by GWC Productions. In memory of Wolfgang Beastly. Originally broadcast on GWC Productions' YouTube channel, Caps Media Television Channel 6 in Ventura on KPPQ LP Ventura at 104.1 FM and on the KPPQ Podcast Network. Episodes can also be viewed on Pasadena Media, either on Spectrum Charter Channel 32 or on AT&T UVerse Channel 99.